The question of the New Testament Gospel's reliability has sparked significant debate among scholars and theologians for centuries. While millions of people base their faith and moral values on these texts, there are numerous factors that raise doubts about their historical accuracy and textual integrity. This examination seeks to provide a comprehensive understanding of why many scholars consider the Gospels to be unreliable sources. The aim is not to disprove anyone's religious beliefs, but instead to encourage serious inquiry into the historical authenticity and claims of the Gospels as the actual and authentic words and accounts of Jesus' life by eyewitnesses, people whom the New Testament claims knew Jesus directly, or, at the very least, had intimate knowledge of his teachings and life, to record and recall his words in such detail in the Gospels. The dating and authorship of the Gospels. The Gospels were written several decades after the events they describe. Most scholars agree that Mark was the earliest of the four canonical Gospels, likely written around 70 CE, approximately 40 years after the death of Jesus, traditionally dated around 30 to 33 CE. The four canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are considered canonical because early Christian communities and church leaders recognized them as authoritative accounts of Jesus' life, teachings, death, and resurrection. It is widely accepted, however, that none of the Gospels were written by eyewitnesses. Mark, for instance, is thought to have been authored by a literate disciple or someone associated with the early Christian community, but it's unlikely that the author was one of the 12 disciples. During this time, literacy rates were low. It is improbable that Jesus' closest followers, who were mostly uneducated fishermen and laborers, would have been literate enough to write complex Greek texts, the language in which the Gospels were written. Matthew and Luke are estimated to have been written around 80 to 90 CE, while John is generally dated to 90 110 CE. This gap in time raises the possibility of evolving stories and interpretations before the events were recorded. 2. The transmission process. Hand-copied texts. In the first century, producing written documents was vastly different from today. Johannes Gutenberg's invention of the printing press in 1440 revolutionized information dissemination, but before this, all manuscripts were hand-copied by scribes. Each copy introduced risks of human error, especially in long, complex texts like the Gospels. Mistakes could range from minor spelling errors to significant omissions or additions, and each mistake would be perpetuated in subsequent copies. This gradual process created a layering of inaccuracies in the texts, as they were repeatedly copied. For example, the earliest fragment of Mark, known as P45, dates to around 220 CE, over 150 years after the original Gospel of Mark was likely written. This fragment, written in Greek, contains only small portions of 8 chapters. The first complete copy of Mark available to scholars dates from the 4th century, Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, approximately 300 years after the original. By then, the text had passed through many hands, each potentially introducing further errors and changes. 3. Variability in manuscripts. A major challenge in studying the Gospels is the vast number of manuscript variants. Scholars estimate there are around 5,500 Greek New Testament manuscripts, along with many in Latin, Syriac, and other ancient languages. However, no two manuscripts are entirely identical. Studies reveal that over 94% of these manuscripts date from the 9th century or later, nearly 900 years after the originals were composed. This variability became particularly evident with the advent of the printing press in the 15th century. Printers noticed differences among the texts they were copying, raising questions about which version was the most authentic. In 1707, scholar John Mills spent 30 years examining over 100 Greek New Testament manuscripts and documented over 30,000 variations among them. While some discrepancies are minor, such as spelling or grammar, others are more significant and affect the meaning of the text. 4. Deliberate alterations. While many textual errors in the Gospels can be attributed to unintentional mistakes, some changes appear to have been intentional. For instance, scholars have concluded that the story of the attempted stoning of an adulterous woman in the Gospel of John, commonly known as the pericope adulterae, was not part of the original text and was added later. Another significant addition involves the Gospel of Mark, where 12 extra verses were added at the end, Mark 16:9-20, to provide a more complete conclusion, as the original narrative ended abruptly, with the women fleeing the empty tomb without telling anyone of Jesus' resurrection, Mark 16:2-8. There are also examples of theological alterations. For instance, some early manuscripts of Matthew 24 omit a line where Jesus mentions that not even the Son knows the date of the final judgment, likely because this line seemed to challenge the doctrine of Jesus' divinity. Another example is in Luke 23:34, where Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." This line is missing from some of the oldest manuscripts, suggesting it may have been added later. 5. The problem of textual integrity. The sheer volume of errors and inconsistencies within the Gospels raises a fundamental question. Can we trust the texts as they exist today? With so many errors, some accidental and others intentional, it becomes challenging to determine what the original texts of the Gospels actually said. Modern translations of the Bible are based on the best available manuscripts, but even so, scholars often make educated guesses in cases where the original meaning is unclear or where multiple readings exist. As Bart Ehrman, a renowned biblical scholar, explains in his book Misquoting Jesus, 2005, the centuries-long process of manually copying manuscripts inevitably introduced changes, leading to the texts we have today being markedly different from the originals. This does not imply that all aspects of the Gospels are fabricated, but it does suggest that we cannot claim with certainty to possess the unaltered words and teachings of Jesus as they were initially recorded. In conclusion, the New Testament Gospels face serious issues regarding their historical and textual reliability. The significant time gap between the events and their recording, the long and error-prone process of hand copying, the vast number of manuscript variations, and intentional alterations by scribes all contribute to a narrative that has evolved over centuries. While the Gospels remain an essential part of Christian faith and theology, it is important to approach them with an understanding of these complexities. For those seeking a purely historical account, the Gospels, as they exist today, do not offer a reliable, unaltered record of events from the life of Jesus. Rather, they provide a deeply layered and evolving tradition, shaped by human hands and minds throughout history.